thank very sincerely the Foundation for the excellent work it does promoting research into some of the largest issues we deal with as societies. And I would also like to thank the Foundation very much for inviting me to moderate this session. I'm not sure that I myself would invite anyone from my country at the moment to moderate anything at all about Europe. However, we are fortunate to have probably the two best thinkers in Europe on the subject that we are debating and thinking about this evening. Bruno Palier and Joakim Palme. Please welcome them. So Bruno is the director of the Interdisciplinary Laboratory on Evaluating Public Policy and has a wide range of accolades and done an enormous number of interesting things with a focus on the changing world of work and how it interacts with welfare. Joakim, who is a distinguished sociologist and professor of political science at Uppsala University, and has specialized, well, also has a very wide range of jobs, activities, and interests, but there is there a focus on comparing what's going on in the welfare states in different European countries. Gentlemen. So first, what I would really like to know is what the two of you, Bruno first perhaps, what the two of you made of the study. What were the really interesting points in it for you?
So what I found very interesting is first, as has been mentioned, it's innovative aspect in the sense that it didn't take for granted what the EU said about Portugal, but said we have to accept to make some projection, to think about the future of our pension, and the welfare state, but taking into account more realistic assumption about the present and the future, taking into account Portuguese context. That's first thing. The second thing is that we who do a lot of comparison about welfare states in Europe, we lack of data about Portugal, we lack of studies on Portugal, so that's a very important step forward there. And then, of course, I think that as Amka answered rightly, it's a very stand and integrate study in the sense that they promote dialogue, reflection by providing data, but also providing scenarios and saying if you do this, then these are the consequences, or if you do that, that's the consequences. And I think that's the true role of researchers, which is not to replace governments or democracy, but just to say, this is the diagnosis, these are the potential solutions, and these are the consequences, and then democracy chooses.
Joakim, what did you take from it?
Well, I was surprised by the sort of massive consequences we see of population aging and falling fertility rates on population development in the sense of population decline and the changing dependency ratios. And for me, this is not only an issue of pensions, but also of wider welfare issue. I mean, that young people don't have the possibility to have the number of children they want to. We know that Europeans want at least 2 children, and this is I think problematic in that respect. I also think it's problematic for the wider macroeconomic development. We have this population decline to foresee. So I think that that was the two sort of wider issues that I saw coming from this report. On the pension issue, I think it was good in the sense that it, despite the kind of pessimistic scenarios for the population development, identified realistic strategies for dealing with the pension issue. And I think that this is one good way of demystifying the future, in the sense that the more we study the preconditions, we can act in a better and more sustainable way.
Can you talk a bit to us about how Portuguese pension system and more broadly the Portuguese welfare state compares in terms of its challenges and its successes to other European systems?
Well, here I think we might agree that Portugal is the clearest star of the Southern European welfare states.
It's the star?
Yes, because it's having higher female labor force participation. People work longer in their lives. Mothers work more than in other Southern European countries. So there's a lot of good preconditions for dealing with the challenges as I see that with aging populations. And then, of course, compared to some of the Northern European countries, there's still a gap and room for improvement. And I think this also speaks to not only sort of where in Europe you are, but also what kind of institutions you have in place.
Yeah, in a way, I would say that what is amazing and a bit mysterious is the relative success of Portugal having such a welfare state. So I would put it this way, because there is an enormous focus.
Sorry, when you say having such a welfare state, what do you mean by that?
It's a typical welfare state of Southern Europe, which is spending a lot on pension. Most of its expenditure goes to pension and healthcare. Very few things, if not nothing, for children, for families. A neglect of youth, which is not specific to Southern Europe. You have that in France too, in many countries. And despite that, you have not much formally organized to support family life and working life. And despite all these common traits with other southern welfare systems, again, you have a greater participation of women into the labor market, longer working life, which are key elements for equality in society, but also for making pension sustainable. So there is a little bit of a mystery in our research.
Sorry, the mystery there lies in the labor market rather than the welfare system.
It lies probably in the families too.
Okay.
And the families too, and grandmothers and grandparents, and the role and neighborhood and solidarity in society and community that help each other in a different way, let's say, and you have more participation, which is absolutely key, because it's something I didn't hear so much in the debate previously, but one of the questions is, if we speak about the contribution, is how much contribution you get. And it also depends on how much and how many persons work. So if you have half of the population women not working, or at least not working for pay, you have less contribution. If they work only half time or third time, even in some southern countries, you have less income for the pension. And here in Portugal, you're closer to the rest of Europe, if not there. And that's something which is remarkable. The other thing which is remarkable is the pace through which Portugal has been able to get out of the crisis. If you compare to Spain, Italy, and Greece, and I would say even France, there has been an ability to go outside the crisis over the recent few years, which is also remarkable, and so far not so much noticed at the European level by the European institution, and not so much understood either. The Economist hasn't done the headline on the Portuguese miracle.
I'm actually ashamed that The Economist hasn't, and you're right, it hasn't. But I think it was yesterday, the Financial Times had one of its big read pieces, which is, here's a big thing everyone should pay attention to, about Portugal's success.
Yeah.
And actually, I haven't seen it do such a positive piece on any single European country for a very long time. So
if you look at the journey, I mean, it's a journey upwards. So that's great.
Yeah. If you could do one thing to the Portuguese welfare state, what would you do? What
I heard, the debate previously and the study, etc., is very traditional. Very common to France, to countries who speak about welfare state reform. We start and focus on pension. And what I would do, and I think Joakim would agree, I would say pension is the last thing. The first thing is children. Children, their parents, and youth. If you better take care of them, if you better prepare the children, if you better support the youth, then you have more people able to work, then you have the capacity to pay for pension. So the best solution to the pension problem is to make sure that children have their chance, that youngsters have access to employment, that women have their chance to work. So if I had to do one thing is to focus on family, youngsters and children. That's the thing.
Joakim, what would you do to the Portuguese welfare state if you could?
Well, I listened to the debate here before, and it was clear that the Swedish pension reform was subject to debate. So I would not recommend an automatic sort of implementation of the Swedish pension reform here. But I see the Swedish pension reform as one alternative to deal with the kinds of challenges that Portugal has ahead of her. And that, of course, there are other possible avenues to enter, and we see a number of different technical solutions. But I would rather sort of point to what we've not discussed so much, and this is how we link the social protection systems to issues around social inclusion and what was touched briefly on social pensions. And I think that there are clear reasons for thinking twice, both when we are thinking about children and women, to have an egalitarian perspective and see how we can implement policy instruments that are not only good for the economy in general and for middle class, but that have an inclusive element. And here I think that there are interesting examples out in Europe how to better integrate social pensions with the contributory pensions. And also, I mean, we talked a lot about...
Sorry, can I just stop you there? I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Can you give me one or two concrete examples of what you mean?
So there are different approaches to basic pensions, and apparently Portugal combines both minimum provisions within the contributory system and social pensions, and then some top-ups. But one could also think of this in more universalistic terms to guarantee every Portuguese old person a basic income. And that we know is very effective in terms of eradicating poverty, and you can integrate it in ways that also provide good work incentives for those who are in the contributory system. And also to think about healthcare and elder care in these terms, that we're not only sort of organizing things for the insiders on the labor market, but something that can provide services for every old person. And this is going to be a financial challenge, and if the public sector doesn't respond, it will be a burden on families, and we can see from the projections that families will be much smaller, having to take care of more old people. So I think that this is part of a generational contract that has to be thought through. I mean, it's eventually it's about values and where we want to go. So before you start to fix the Portuguese pension system, I mean, we need to know what is wrong and what is wrong in relation to what we want to achieve.
I'd like to move on to the financing of the system. So not just Portugal here, but looking across Europe, starting with you, Joakim, how do you think we should think about the future financing of the welfare state? What are the big factors that we should have in our minds? What are the big variables that we should think about shifting?
First, we should think, and this is very much along what Bruno said, about the future tax base, about the humans and the human capital that they possess. So it's not only about tax rate, but the base, and broaden that, and also make it more productive. I think that's very important. That's one way of solving the goal conflict, the trade-offs that are otherwise there. The second is that we have to recognize that the major part of the funding of the welfare state need to be borne by labor income. And we should be careful in order to design the financing in order not to disincentivize people to work, because that's the basis. And then I think what is increasingly clear is that if we want to tax capital, we need more of European cooperation. Otherwise, Google, Amazon, the next global company will escape taxation. And at present, European countries are doing the other way around. They're lowering the taxation on companies, and by that eroding their own, the future of their own welfare states. So I think that's another theme.
And Bruno, I'd love it if you could elaborate a bit. Those are obviously fairly serious constraints on expanding the tax base. You jack up income taxes, you disincentivize work, you try and jack up taxes on corporations, and they all go off to Singapore or Dubai. Can you talk a bit more about those constraints and how we deal with them?
The first thing to say is that the disadvantage of Southern Europe, and including Portugal, is an advantage, is that since you have much less people at work, at paid work in Southern Europe, in Portugal, than in the rest of Europe, you have a margin for having more people at work and more people paying contributions. So the question is to make it work this way, and again, investing in human capital, in skills, in competence, in capacities to be able to work, and having your kids taken care of is absolutely key here. The other thing is that I think what is absolutely key is not to strengthen too much the contributory logic. And it seems that it's also the case in Portugal to say, I get a pension because I contributed, I paid for it. And this is a very traditional way of thinking of a Segurança Social. I paid for my insurance, so I want my benefit back, which is forgetting a little bit the circumstance under which you paid and the circumstance under which you will be receiving. And the thing is that for pension, there is a timeline, right? 40, 50, 60, 70 years, and the context is not the same. And those who are in reality paying, it's not you in the past, it's the current ones. And we need to find ways to better connect the financing and the way of calculating pension and the context. So the situation of the active population, the demographic situation of the elderly, rather than just saying, I contributed, therefore I want my pension corresponding to that. And one way to do that is to blur a little bit, to mix up this inclusivity, this universalism, saying this is a duty and a duty of the society to guarantee things to pensioners, but because we do that, we are not just guaranteeing your pension because you paid for it, but it's a social contract. And if we can do that, then we can ask for other types of financing than contribution, tax, and including not only tax on labor, but tax on firms and on this kind of thing.
And is that essentially a political issue? I mean, is that essentially about the kind of dialogue that we have as societies?
The problem is that it's a political issue at the national and at the European level, and even at the global level. The tax evasion and tax optimization is now dealt with at the OECD level, and you have to do that on a global scale. At least in Europe, we could do that. But the problem is not only Google and GAFA. It's the problem is Ireland, Luxembourg, some German states, and other places that do rebate on taxation. So it's a lack of cooperation, so a lack of solidarity in a way in Europe that prevents us to tax the most mobile. And basically, there is a huge challenge that at least in France, in Italy, we see the political backlash. I haven't heard of such a revolt here in Portugal, but you've heard about the yellow vest, the gilets jaunes, and these kind of things. I think these people, they are not very mobile, right? They don't think that they can change country or even change cities just to find a job. So they are heavily taxed because they are not mobile. And those who are not taxed and less taxed are capital, But also, you know, the ones who are mobile, the humans who are mobile, and I say, if you tax me, I will go and work on the other side of the channel or something like that. And this creates a resentment of those who have the feeling to always pay and not see any benefits of neither the growth or have the feeling of paying more. And this is very political, but not only a political choice, it's a political threat on our systems if we continuously have the burden waiting on the same. And these same ones are starting to say, I'm fed up, I don't want to pay so much tax.
Okay, but given that we've got all of these states in Europe, all of which manage their systems in a different way, manage their politics in a different way, manage their economies slightly differently, Joakim, which countries would you say have managed best what Bruno is talking about, the creation, the transference to people, if you like, that they're contributing to a welfare state which is for everybody, rather than you put it in, you take it out again?
Ask a Swede.
Well, I do think that it's not only the Nordic countries, but I think the Netherlands has part of that too, that you have universal components where you also contribute to the funding of the system. Britain used to have more of that with the beverage system, which was contributive, still universal. It's now crumbling. NHS is still there, I believe. But so I think that this is the kind of nation-building projects that are very important in terms of fostering social capital, social cohesion, and I think it's economic matters, but it's also social and political matters. But I mean, be a little optimistic on the possibilities of changing the way we tax capital, and I think two things contribute to that. One is the new geopolitical situation, where we have, on the one hand, Putin, and we have sort of radical Islamistic terror organizations, and to increase security, there's a much better monitoring of flows of money, which is also putting the eyes on other kinds of criminal behavior involving, I mean, just very rich people. The second thing is that when you look at the international organizations, IMF, World Bank, OECD, they're deeply concerned and worried about the rising inequalities. Not European Union, I would say. So I think that while these half Anglo-American organizations have raised the warning flag, I think European Union is behind here, and I think that it could do much more. And I'm not talking about sort of direct intervention in national policies, but in terms of setting up standards, cooperating and benchmarking.
Bruno, could we move on to how changes in the workplace are already perhaps impacting the welfare state, and perhaps constraining the choices we have in the future, perhaps making the problems we're talking about easier to deal with? I'd love you to talk to us a little about how you see that.
So what I see to be becoming the key structural transformation of our societies, the developed countries, is what's called job polarization. Is that if you look at what happened in labor markets in most advanced countries over the last 30 years, is that there has been creation of highly paid jobs and creation of very low paid jobs, and there has been erosion hollowing out of the middle, the mid-pay. And this is really a new trend because the idea was more that you started here and you had an increasing share of the population earning more money, so the rise of the middle class, and the rise of the middle class is leading to democracy, and democracy is helping the rise of the middle class. It's leading to the welfare state. It's really made for and paid by the welfare state. And what we see currently is the squeezing of the middle class. And there has been a lot of work saying that this is mostly due to automation, So computers, robots, they are able to do things that are repetitive. And those who have repetitive jobs are more in the middle of the pay range. So they can be replaced by a computer or robot, both together. And this is really a new trend. And this is a dramatic trend in the sense that it's going fast. It's not stopping. You can see repeatedly. And it's really hurting those who were at the center of the society. And once again, to my view, this is what we see in the Gilets jaunes in France, but this is also what we see partly behind voting for Trump, voting for Brexit. There has been a lot of studies showing that the lower middle class, those who are really losing ground, are the ones voting more than the others for the extreme right, xenophobic right, or for Trump, or Brexit. There has been studies on that. And this is, of course, worrisome because these people are losing ground, but also because they are vocal in the sense that we, in social science, we have focused a lot on outsiders. Right? We have focused a lot on those having very precarious jobs, being poor while still working, being excluded from society, from the labor market. And we focused, I'm not saying too much, but we forgot to focus on what was happening in the middle. And the middle is shrinking and is shouting currently. And we have to understand what's going on there because they have their own expectation. They have a house, they have a job, they have a car and these kind of things. And they see that they may lose their jobs. They are pretty sure that their children will not have the same capacities of them to climb. And that's the major trend in the labor market. This has huge consequences for the welfare state because then you lose the middle that is able to pay for it. And this creates more people diverged on the outsider side, right? So more social problems.
Sorry, are we seeing a hollowing out in terms of actual employment numbers?
Yes.
Or in terms of wage rate?
No, we see that in terms of employment numbers. Mm-hmm. So you have a decrease in the numbers of people paid in the middle and what is called routinized jobs, both in manufacturing industry, and this is well known since the 70s, but this is also occurring now in administration and services. Think of banks, you have ATM, think of supermarkets, you have the cashier replaced by so this is not where we create jobs. And this is worrisome. People are really worried about their own future, and they feel the threat, and they are vocal because they are insiders, so they are used to vote and to be listened to, and so they are shouting. And here comes the question. If we let this go without asking any questions and if we just say, sorry, guys, but you will have to accept a lower wage, a job which is not your skill, which is another kind of things down, people will revolt. And the most available solution is to close down the frontiers and to try to stop everything. Conservatism, trying to stop everything, and we will try to protect and to defend what we have, which is the current thing. I think there is another way to look at things. And the other way to look at things is to really question the fact that the jobs which are created on the low pay scale are really non-productive, bad jobs. If we look carefully at what these jobs are basically servicing the other ones. So for men, it's driving a Uber, or this kind of things. It's delivering, right? So it's bringing things to other people. And for women, it's taking care of others, children, elderly, and these kind of things. And this is also restaurant and retail and these kind of things. And we have in mind that these jobs are not productive, they are not that useful, they don't deserve a good wage. Whereas our jobs, researchers, journalists, experts, etc., are supposed to be creative and deserve a high pay. I would like just to ask ourselves whether the distribution of income is fair when we get higher, because we are on the right side. We are not suffering from the crisis, etc., and they get lower ones. Whether this is a fair distribution, not just in terms of equality, but just in terms, is it fair? Because a lot of our productivity is based on their service. I can be focusing on my job because there is someone to do my shopping, my cleaning, to take care of my kids, to take care of my parents when they will be. And these people help me to be more productive. So perhaps we can ask the question of a better share. Why not sharing because I rely on them, instead of thinking I deserve what I earn because I'm so productive and genial and working a lot, etc. Whereas part of what I get is due to the fact that a lot of servants around me support me. If we are able to question that, we have here the base for a new redistribution, a new investment in the current proletariat that may become the new middle class. Not the repetitive middle class, the Charles Chaplin, but the servicing middle class, which can become the center of our future societies.
That's very, very optimistic, very encouraging idea.
If there is a big if.
Joakim, what do you think of that? Does it seem plausible to you? If so,
I think it sounds great, and I think again that a comparative perspective is very helpful, because what you describe is a bit Franco-centric. There are other examples that are less sort of illustrating of what you describe here in terms of hollowing out the middle class, less accurate when it comes to the development of minimum wages. But it requires, I think, again, massive investment in the education and skills of these low-wage workers in order to actually maintain productivity, and we know the huge importance of secondary education across Europe. It's not only university education that is important for growth, but secondary education. Plus, I mean, the naivete with your alternative scenario is perhaps that you know how we are. It's difficult to give voice to others. I mean, there has to be someone who represent given the declining unionization, etc. It's especially the service sector. It's a huge challenge to sort of push up wages, because I think that, I mean, we can agree that sort of in the short term productivity might not be important, but in the long run it's sort of incredibly important, not only for economic growth, but also for the distribution of economic resources. And I think that I completely agree with you. I mean, towards what kind of production we are heading, but the way we organize that is critical if we are going to distribute the fruits of our new ways of producing more evenly, or if we end up in the US, where globalization has meant less for 95% of the population and huge profits for the very rich. So I think it's, again, this is why the international organizations are worried, because eventually not only the economies of these countries that are threatened, you can look around Europe and see that democracy is threatened by not only increasing inequalities, but also the kinds of counter-mobilization that triggers, that are triggered by this situation.
I mean, Bruno, I'm struggling to think my way through the economics of your encouraging scenario. So let's talk about care home workers. How does investment in human capital make them more productive? Given that you can work in a care home with very few learned skills.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Would you give your home to anybody?
My home?
Yeah. Would you let a cleaner, shopper enter, not asking anything? Say, well, you don't need qualification. Just do what you want.
Well,
well, no.
That's a very interesting question, which I'm thinking through. Okay, I have given the care of my home and indeed my children to somebody with no formal qualifications at all, but who is a splendid person?
Yeah, splendid is a qualification. The problem is that, no, but I'm not joking here.
Yeah, okay, it's interesting.
The question is, how can we acknowledge the kind of qualities that are required for the services I was referring to? And this is not a university degree, but you have to be splendid. Can we learn how to be splendid? Yes. It's called, in neuroscience, it's called non-cognitive skills.
Okay.
Right? It's how to behave, how to be tolerant, how to be polite, this kind of thing. And you can learn that. James Heckman has shown that. You learn that at the age of 1, 2, 3, and then there are other things. There are a lot of qualities how to take care of a home, but even more, of course, how to take care of children, elderly people, and even, you know, in this low-paid sector, they put usually health and education. So you see that here you start not having any doubt about the qualities required here. Okay, so one of the questions is first to acknowledge that not anybody can do it because yourself you're not ready to let it do by. The second question, and here what is very important is that you are satisfied, right, with the service. Okay, so the quality of the service is absolutely key here. The question now comes is, how can I measure that? What's your ranking in splendidity, right? Can we measure that?
Yeah.
And here I think that looking at the platforms is very interesting. What are the platforms doing? What is Uber doing? What is Amazon doing? It's starting to measure quality according to the client, right? And we are entering a new world, the world of services, where what matters is not how much did I do in one day, but is how did I do it, right? Quality becomes central, quality qualification, and how to measure that, how to train, learn it, and then pay people according to that. So I think there are some economics solutions there that the economists are lagging behind, but of course firms are heading the way. I'm not arguing for adopting this way of measuring, I'm just saying that some people are measuring. And as you know, the NHS quality is trying also to measure this kind of thing. So it's a central point here. The second element is about the wage. You know, a lot of economists say wage measures productivity. So if you have a low wage, it's because you have a low productivity. What can I do? The thing is that you have to look at the situation in the labor market of these people. Why is it that they are so low paid? It may be because they are not productive. But it may also be that there is so much competition for one job that there is no capacity to ask for higher wage. And this can be understood if you have the hollowing of the middle, so you have more and more people relatively skilled falling into there, and they are taking the job. So, and they have to accept a lower job. So the supply and demand makes the wage low. And the second point is that these are sectors, so, you know, the low-paid services, almost no unionized or under-unionized. So there is no very little capacities, except in Nordic countries, even though it's the lowest unionization rate amongst the Nordic countries. And here you have a lack of a push-up. But once again, this problem can be the solution. You know, unions almost everywhere, but in Nordic countries are losing members. Why is that? Because industry is losing jobs, but they should invest there. And that's probably the second move. The first one is to acknowledge that this exists, this is important. The second one is to unionize and try to push for a higher wage, and then they will force us to accept to share more. You know, this is more politics than economics there. Lastly, last point here, political one, historical one. The development of social rights of welfare states has never been made under philanthropic decisions. You know, I do that because I like people and they are poor people and I will help them.
Sure.
There has always been two dynamics, right? One dynamic is power. You know, these people, they were threatening to make the revolution, to cut the throat of the bourgeois, if you wish to put it this way. That's one thing. we are living, and not only in France, Joakim, I'm sorry, but in UK and in the US, I think that there is extreme right in Nordic countries. This is the lower middle class, so I don't think that France is the only case here. There is a big threat here, a political threat of destroying things, because they are losing ground anyway. So that's the threat. The second dynamic that is behind the development of social policies is the economic interest in doing that. Do we see employers? Do we see economists? Do we see nations having an interest in developing social rights? And I think we could think of a converging, there is a big threat. We have to find solutions, and the solutions cannot just be you will be more taxed and less paid, which is more or less what he said to the lower middle class. And the more we invest in their skill, the acknowledgement, but also in their wage, the better they will be, but also the better our economies will go, I would say. But we need some strength relationship which are just joaquim currently.
Fear and self-interest.
Yes.
Yeah. Joakim.
I think that, I found it difficult to sell the Swedish pension reform earlier on. But I think that when you look at changes in the social services in Sweden, you can see that, we have had no increase in wage inequality for 2 decades now. And we have the highest employment rate ever by the natives, but also the immigrants. So if you're full-time employed, you're not working poor, even if you have the lowest wages. But I think that this is underpinned by training programs, and this also relates to the old age nursing home, which, by the way, have been closed down to save money, because it's much cheaper to take care of people in their own homes. But again, the same question arises: who would you let into your home? And I think here the question of training, education, certification. When you look at child care, which for some time was, seen as a way of storing kids during daytime so parents could work, also subject to drastic changes in terms of the training and skills of the staff. It used to be 6 months training, now it's 3 years tertiary education for the pedagogues in the care center. So I think that we can see ways of doing these kinds of services in a more egalitarian and a more productive way as well. And it's not only about productivity, it's also about quality and the kinds of interpersonal relations that you mentioned, so important, not only in elderly care, but also in restaurants or wherever you rely on interpersonal relations.
Looking ahead, 20 years' time, Joakim, how do you see European welfare states looking? Give me the good scenario and the bad scenario.
Well, the good scenario, which is perhaps less realistic, is that European countries are doing this, taking this lesson serious, that we can, change the pension system here and there, but what really matters is investing in young people. On top of that, investing in immigrants that come to Europe and have come already in large numbers. That's I think number one. The second thing is that we need to move much further with gender equality, and it's indeed an unfinished revolution in the sense that women have perhaps better educated than ever. My favorite headline was in The Economist, behind every successful man there's an amazed woman, in the sense that these better trained and educated women still are behind in terms of their careers and how they work. So I think that's probably part and parcel of the first recommendation as well. And then I still think that social transfers, anti-poverty policies, we can't give up on that, and especially countries in Southern Europe, maybe not so much Portugal and the others. As long as we don't combine this human capital investment with fighting poverty, I think that these investments will not bring the necessary economic or social return. But the bad scenario is that it will be status quo. We will be adrift, and we will not maintain the quality in the education system, we will not maintain quality in the social protection system. We will be hit by the artificial intelligence, the robots, and globalization in ways that will not only erode social cohesion, but also our economic and political integration in Europe.
Can I just ask you a little bit about the migration issue, which is a very interesting wrinkle in all of this. How do you think migration has contributed to the political and the economic challenges of maintaining good welfare states, and how do you think that's going to develop?
I think that the threat of immigration is partly exaggerated. I think my country has received same size as Portugal, 1 million refugees over a little more than a decade. And that has spurred the macroeconomic development. That's what typical Keynesian development. So we have had good growth for a couple of decades, except for 2009 when we were hit by the economic recession. Of course, this is a cost, initially a very big cost for the state in terms of language training, skills and education, and maintaining the incomes of these people who cannot, for the first 10 years, to a large number, maintain their own living. But I mean, I think the political mobilization in my country has been more about the cultural issues that people feel threatened by the large number of immigrants. Not that it really has been hurting them, the economy, or the ability to deal with the social protection system. And I think that we see similar things going on elsewhere. Britain had the Brexit was driven not by refugee migration primarily, but the cost of the European labor migrants. And I think that was partly driven by poor analysis or no analysis at all. And the numbers that I've seen is suggesting that the European workers have been net contributors, fairly big numbers.
We could spend all night discussing what Brexit was
Yeah,
about.
so
I can bore for Britain about the complications.
So I mean,
of that.
if I have a recommendation for the foundation, which is taking good initiatives here, is to bring out the numbers. I think that's both the cost and the potential returns that we can have. And if you look at the Swedish population development for the future, it looks much better than in Portugal. But of course, it depends on if we are successful in terms of training people to actually make a living and be net contributors. If we can do that, it will be a much easier ride through the aging of our population.
Bruno, good and bad for the future.
I think the good scenario is if we look at the past is the most likely, because since I work on the welfare state, it's supposed to explode in the next decade, yes. Right? And I'm becoming old, so it's been almost 30 years. I've been hearing about the welfare state crisis, which is it hasn't exploded because there is a strong societal and political entrenchment in the belief in that, and I believe that people want so much to have it that they realize that there are things to be done. Sometimes working longer, sometimes paying more, and these kind of things. So I'm not worried. Really, if we look at the trend of the past, I'm more worried about the huge transformation that are going on, and the one I mentioned, the job polarization. However, we should be even more worried by something else that nobody mentioned yet, but that can be the source of the solution. So this is the climate change, right? And the global warming, which is apparently accelerating at a pace that we didn't anticipate. So we just feel it. Now we come in spring in Portugal, not to escape the summer because it's way too hot and all these things. Anyway, this is going very fast, and this is starting to destroy not our countries but others. But this is explaining migration in many ways and these kind of things. However, the only positive aspect of it is that for once, in continental Southern Europe, youth is starting to revolt, right? And for once, because what is really striking is that if you look at the welfare state in France, in Italy, in Portugal, in Greece, it's all for the elderly. You know, sorry to say that, but all the spending is for the elderly. And what is always amazing when I have students and I teach in Italy is that they defend the pension. And they say, but come on, there is so much money going to the pension that you don't get enough for education, you're left poor, the unemployment rate of youngsters is very high. They say, yes, but I live on the grandfather's pension or on abuelo's pension, they say in Spain when I go to Barcelona. So there is the welfare state creates glue between generations, even in Southern Europe. Whereas here on the climate, clearly the young generation say, you are doing nothing and we will have to live in a totally destroyed world. So there is the beginning of a generational conflict, and they will ask for decision. And the decisions will maybe be taken, but this will have consequences also on education and social policies. You know, just having this future generation saying, we are the future and we want to be listened. You have to invest in us. And I think this is a kind of good news out of a very, very dark future there. To my view, the worst scenario is whether the white male backlash becomes permanent. You know, there has been, you've published, not you, but your journal has published a lot of articles about Trump, Nick Farage, and others, Salvini, being the revenge of the white man, the rednecks, being fed up with feminism, with, you know, typical Joachim's youngsters, women, equality, you know, what about us? They take their revenge, they come into power. And there are two possibilities here. It's just the last sign of a dying species, right? We can hope sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Or they are strong enough to stay in power. And in that case, it's true that youngsters, women, and some feminists like us should align to resist that, because normally numbers are in our favors. But this is the key issue. If they are here, they are so selfish, so short in sight, that they will preserve their interest and destroy our future, including the welfare state. That's my worst scenario for me.
We have time for a few questions, and I would love some Portuguese points of view about this. I'm not entirely sure I trust myself for this rather alarming-looking device. I'm probably as good at throwing as my country is at making its mind up what to do. But I would do my best. So I'd love questions, and I'd love any comments about the hollowing out of the labour market in Portugal, for instance, the impact on the welfare state, and any points of view about Portugal compared to other bits of Southern Europe, how you feel you're doing here. Okay, we'll see if we can do it. That was...
Wow. Well done.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Paula Gil, and I want to do some commentaries in what you have said. About the Swedish model, we have a problem in Portugal because our wages are not enough to save. So it's very difficult to have a domestic model in what concerns social security. And I have listened to you and about the importance of the lower jobs. And this is very interesting if we made the connection with the school and our children are or not being taught to have that kind of mentality. Because we teach the children to have a degree, to have a nice job, and we don't teach them to care of the others. So perhaps, and I agree with all that you have said. Normally I'm not so socialist, but I agree with you. I think you have a socialist view. Is typical French, but in fact, listen to you. I am able to open my mind and agree that we have to invest in diversifying the way that we start our population. So the education, the lower level of our age, perhaps is where we can put our attention. And concerning that, how do you think that most of the countries, especially in the United Europe, because it's very difficult if the subjects are only treated in Portugal rather than in Europe, because if we tax the capital in Portugal, the companies, they go to other country, as you said. If we tax the capital markets, they can go to another country. So that is not a solution if we just look to Portugal. We have to look to Europe, and we have European elections. And it's very important that we are aware of the European elections, because if we don't look to Europe as a global place, we are finished as countries, isolated. You can feel that in...
Yeah, that's very good. That's about 15 different questions.
How can we teach the society to invest in different education? Look for skills and not looking for degrees.
Okay, I think there's two really interesting things there. I'm going to divide those up. So, Joakim, if you can deal with the unaffordability of the Swedish model and the diversification of sources of finance. And Bruno, if you can address the question of, because really what you were saying was about values. And so the fundamental shift you requires us to value things differently. How on earth does a society do that? And I'll have my box back, please.
Okay, I'm going to try.
Go on. I have faith in you. Yes!
Whoa. So, about the Swedish pension reform, I think you can do without the funded component. I don't think that's the most important component. I think the most important component is that you have control expenditures and give good incentive structures with a defined contribution formula. Then I think there's a wider discussion about the affordability of the Swedish welfare state, but it's not costly anymore. In terms of taxation level, we are on European average these days. And especially if you take into account that we have comparatively little tax expenditures in our welfare state. So I think the issue of affordability is partly misleading. Then on the other hand, I think that we are having a deficit in our welfare state, because what I said about wage inequality is not true for inequalities at large. I think we are not keeping up our support of the poor people, and we have given away all the taxation of very rich people. So I think that the issue of what Portugal can learn from the Swedish welfare state is certainly not about important individual components, but rather that it provides one alternative to deal with the challenges, and one way of thinking about how to integrate the protection of the middle class with helping the poor.
And on the diversification of finance, I think maybe you answered your own question. I mean, it's something that has to be done beyond national boundaries. It's something that has to be done at European level, at OECD level. Bruno, on values.
Yeah, so I try to be as right-wing economist as possible in my answer. And to say this is totally irrational now, the way we teach, especially in Southern Europe. Because what we teach the children is to learn things that computer can do, right? How to write, how to count, how to learn things by memory, and all these things. And computer can do that. And apparently, computers are less good at interacting with others, as being creative, as creating a team spirit. All these things that they learn at school, especially in Finland, but this kind of thing. So just, it's not being socialist or, good-hearted. It's rational to focus much more today the skill that you learn. And there are, once again, there are a lot of pedagogies about that, new ways, from reverse pedagogy to small groups to, there are many things that we do in course that help children and youngsters to learn how to take care of others, to be a leader, why not? But also to be a cheerful leader, why not? Also, I'm becoming socialist here, I forgot about that. But to be taking the best out of a group, for instance, these kind of things. This is called the non-cognitive skill. And it seems that these are becoming the most important skills on the current service industry, being creative, being collective, being tolerant, being able to that. And you can learn that, right? Then, if this is not acknowledged for your splendid woman or for child carer, but clearly in the CVs for becoming a manager, a human resource director, etc., these are the skills that are valued. So if it's valued here, it's very likely that it will come down to the rest of society, at least it's feasible, it's possible. As long as we say these are absolutely key as an asset, as a skill in a servicing economy. And servicing economy, the story about Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was not a big computer guy, but he had the sense of the client. He knew what the experience of the client was, right? And this was his skill. It was key for making the success. He said, no, people will not like that. People will like this kind of thing. So it's really, feeling about the other ones. It's becoming an absolutely key skill. And I just spoke about being successful in economy, right?
I want to be even more right-wing, and in fact, he claimed that it would continue to be very important to learn children to read and write and count, but also to take children serious, not only as in the social interaction, but also to take serious that they will be grown up, and that actually, I think also Portugal has undersigned the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which says that we should not only protect children and provide them with resources, we should also let them participate in decision making. And this is about taking the voice of children serious. Not that they has to necessarily appoint the principals at school, but what they say, people have an obligation to listen to and take into account.
Thank you both very, very much indeed. What you have pointed out to us this evening is what's really fascinating about this whole subject, which is the moment you start talking about it, you get into the deepest and broadest things about how we organize our society. You get into the fearful rise of the far right. You get into the business of our fundamental values and how we teach our children. And that's why it's so brilliant to be able to be here with such great thinkers and an enthusiastic audience. And thank you so much to the Foundation for allowing this to happen and for enriching Europe in this way.
Thank you very much.
It was great. Thank you very much. Very good.
Thank you very much. I'm just for the goodbyes. Estamos assim a chegar ao fim de mais uma sessão, mais um encontro organizado pela Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos. Vou só despedir-me com um agradecimento especial a todas as equipas envolvidas e que permitiram este dia de debates, ao Teatro Nacional Dona Maria II, que nos recebeu tão bem, e, claro, a todos os convidados, todos os oradores que aqui estiveram e, acima de tudo, também à presença de cada um de vós aqui na plateia do teatro. O próximo encontro é já no dia 1 de junho. é Dia da Criança. E o tema é dos mais decisivos na formação dos mais novos, porque tão maltratado tem sido pelos mal crescidos, pelos mais crescidos. Mal crescidos e mais crescidos. As gafes têm sempre alguma razão de ser. Pelos mal crescidos e pelos mais crescidos. Vamos debater ética, valores e política. Contamos convosco, portanto, e com todos. Muito obrigado pela vossa presença. Continuamos a achar que só a pensar é que a gente se pode entender um pouco melhor. Portanto, obrigado uma vez mais, boa tarde e até junho.